Hi guys, it's Sophie. So I'm going to do my non-fiction etc. wrap up for you now. Not too many in this side, it was more heavy in fiction this month, but still some good things in there. The first one I'm going to talk about is Authenticity is a Con by Peter York. This is published by Bite Back Publishing, and they do these short sort of polemic essays on a variety of different controversial subjects. And I read Why Women Need Quotas by Vicky Price and really enjoyed that one, and just think they're interesting to sort of dive into. So I saw this one in one of my sort of local really cheap bookshops and thought I'd give it a shot. Unfortunately I really didn't get on with this one. I think it was really badly missold on the back to what the essays are actually about. So I'm going to read you the sort of part on the back that really sold me. Authenticity, finding yourself, doesn't and can't allow for the idea that a fair few authentic selves might be authentically appalling and so much better repressed. So it was talking a little bit about sort of that authentic movement that's kind of going on at the moment, that you should try and be as yourself as possible, and that you shouldn't be trying to put out, you know, images or representations of yourself that don't really represent who you are in your work life, your home life, and things like this, things like YouTube. And that was interesting to me because I like sort of learning a little bit about that. It seemed a little bit sort of HR-y as well, sort of salesy, so I wanted to just see what it was all about. But the thing that really sold me on it was talking about whether or not sort of putting out the idea of authenticity might be negative for some individuals to do. So it mentions sort of jihad and serial killing, hardcore pornography and paedophilia as reasons why we might want to repress things that are inside us. It didn't talk about that in any sense at all. It spoke about sort of expensive shops in hippie districts and how the author thought that they were just really fake, and that, ooh, don't you know, they're more expensive than, you know, it costs so much to make things out of paper and string, and it's the most expensive paper you could ever have. And I'm sort of like, yeah, well, we know that. I just don't think what the essay was anything to do with how it was marketed. And I think it's good marketing, because I would have really been interested in reading what they'd said it was, but it just didn't hit any of those notes for me at all. It was really disappointing. If I'd expected it to be the other way around and sort of talking about the more commercial aspects of it, then I probably would have been more interested, but it was sold as personal aspects and personal faults, and it just wasn't there at all. Sorry guys. And then the next one I have is another non-fiction, and this more than makes up for it. This is The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee, and this was one of the best books, non-fiction books that I've read in a really, really long time. I was incredibly impressed with it. So the book itself is speaking about cancer, so the history of cancer, and the history of sort of battle against cancer, and how we've sort of tried to deal with it over the years, how it's been perceived, what it feels like to be a patient, what it feels like sort of in the media, and it goes through really this whole huge history of the medicine and the patients who are dealing with cancer. Mukherjee writes incredibly well about these topics. At no point did this feel inaccessible, whilst at some point it may have felt a little dense. There was never a time when I thought, I'm going to have to go away and have a think about that before I can go back and approach the book again. It isn't one of those popular science books or science books that sort of assault you with a lot of different theories and considerations before you can understand the text. You can actually just sit down and read it, and it's so well explained that there's no need for that sort of pause, which I think sometimes can break non-fiction, especially science non-fiction, for a lot of people. And it was just so well done. Obviously, given the subject matter, it isn't necessarily the easiest book to read, because cancer is a really horrible thing that a lot of people suffer with. And you know, you do have some kind of empathetic response as you're going through for the people and the doctors who are dealing with this illness. But it was absolutely intriguing, and I've got the Gene downstairs because I saw I hold that one, and I'm really looking forward to it, because I, to be honest, was expecting it to be interesting but wasn't expecting it to be so well done. So I just can't wait to jump into more of his writing. If you are interested in this one, if you like non-fiction, or if you normally don't sort of deal that much non-fiction, whilst it's big and heavy and scary, it's really good and it is really accessible. And then the last non-fiction I have for the month, I don't think I hauled for you guys, but this one is Radical by Nawaz. So I read Islam and the Future of Tolerance by Nawaz earlier on in the year, I think in January, and just thought it was a completely fresh perspective. He's an individual who grew up in Essex and sort of suffered quite a lot of racial abuse when he was a young boy, felt quite isolated from his society in general, and he ended up falling into, partly of his own making and partly because of those pressures of what was going on around him, that sort of extreme version of Islam, and ended up being a recruiter for a group, quite literally going around trying to make more people join the extremist version of Islam. So he came from this background of being a very, extreme believer, being someone who was quite literally pushing this extreme religion on other people and believed in sort of Sharia law, wanted that sort of caliphate rule, so religious theocracy to rule over pretty much all of the world. So some really some things that most of us sort of balk at. And it's about him sort of explaining how he fell into that, and about him explaining how he came out of that. And what he does now is he runs a non-profit called Quilam, which reaches out to young Muslims and sort of provides them with an alternate story. So rather than them falling into the sort of pattern where extremism is going to be something that protects them and something that gives them an identity, he's saying, here's a version of Islam that's moderate, and here's the support that's available for you. I personally think his work is really valuable, and I think learning a little bit more about that was really what I got from this book. I think he's a much better public speaker than he is writer, however. So I enjoyed the book because of its content rather than its writing. If it sounds of interest to you, do dip in and out of his speeches online, because I think he does speak very well. And there's a TED talk I think I'll link down below for you. And if that interests you, then maybe do pick this book up. But I would say if it's sort of a vague interest to you, you're probably going to get the same information and the same kind of message from his talks online, to be perfectly honest. I still really enjoyed it, but then again, I have a strong interest in the topic, so that may be why. And here's a sort of etc. bit. We have one short story collection, The Fun Parts by Sam Lipsyte. This is a very strange collection of short stories. They're not that sort of magical realism stuff that we normally go for here. They are sort of a little bit darker, I suppose, and just a little bit odd. The one that sort of stuck out to me the most was this sort of odd story where we have these guys playing Dungeons and Dragons, and they have this sort of really sadistic, really horrible dungeon master who's running the game and will just kill them for anything. So they'll go through a quest, and maybe they'll just started. It takes quite a lot of time to set up, I understand, I've never done it myself. And he'll kill them by letting them have like a splinter in their shoe that gets a bit nasty, and they end up with an abscess and lose their leg, and then they fall down or something like really minor, and they'll end up having to stop the whole game, and they go back again and again trying to play and trying to win against him, but he just really enjoys sort of screwing their game up. There's a brilliant story as well about this birthing coach who gets like way too into the role and is giving the parents all this advice that they don't want and they don't need, and they're just like, please just leave us alone, and he won't leave their house. So they're odd short stories. I sort of quite enjoyed it, but I think some of them sort of blended together to some extent, which is odd because they were all quite different stories when I read them, but thinking back on it, I think probably there are only 3 or 4 that I remember quite strongly. So sort of a middling short story collection, but it was fun, and for me it was very cheap, so I feel as though it was worth it. And then I have one play to show you, and that is The Sunset Limited by Cormac McCarthy. I absolutely loved this one again. I'm sorry guys, I don't know what it is about Cormac McCarthy, I just thought it was brilliant. This is a sort of philosophical discussion that's going on between 2 main characters called Black and White, and very quickly in the story what you learn is that White has tried to kill himself by jumping in front of a train, the Sunset Limited, and Black has saved his life. And what's happening in this discussion is Black is trying to convince White that life is worth living, and White is trying to convince him why it isn't. And the dialogue is just stunning. It's such a cool idea anyway. I absolutely loved it. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking about it particularly well. But it has some gorgeous quotes in here as well that I sort of picked out and pulled, and I think that the play wrapped up really nicely. It's something I'd really like to go and see done, or maybe I'll try and find a version online for myself to watch. But I think I'm quite impressed by the fact that McCarthy has managed to do novels and plays that resonated with me both. Probably not my favourite of all of them. I've still got Child of God, which I absolutely adore. This is probably the second favourite of mine that I've read of his so far. And then the very last thing I have to show you this month is Ghost Machine by Mirov. This is a poetry collection, and I saw this one on Mercedes' channel, and she really enjoyed it. And it had been sitting on my wishlist for a while, and I just sort of fancied some poetry and I picked it up, and I absolutely loved it. I sort of didn't know what I was reading until about halfway through, and then I just sort of submitted myself to what was happening. It's a very strange experience, and just loved it. It's really hard to explain because I don't feel as though the poems work on their own, personally. Some people might feel differently. I don't read an awful lot of poetry, but they have this odd sort of feeling when they were put together. So I'll read you the first one just as an example of the kind of writing we're talking about. So this poem is called Ghost of a Morning After You Left Me. I hover in front of a chain link fence for hours reading signs. My days are long protracted silence. I pull myself into phone calls to avoid a little rain. Wind comes through the crack in the glass. They put new lights in the Basilia months ago, I didn't notice. I program a future version of myself to remember a face slick with seawater ringed with wet hair. The message is sent back with nothing inside. I cannot believe my life was 3 years ago. I would have sex and just lie there, thinking about things I had to do. I woke up in a grocery store. I was buying broccoli. So there's this really weird like stream of consciousness, sort of interrupted sentences, interrupted thoughts. But what you find as you go through is that certain phrases are repeated, and certain parts of sentences and parts of poems are repeated in future poems. And I really identified with the person behind these poems. I really felt like I got a sense of who they were, and that was really amazing because it didn't make any kind of sense reading them to start with, but the sort of tapestry of the poetry as it built up gave this gorgeous sort of image and this wonderful insight into this person's head. And I need to read this again sort of sometime soon because it was, you know, quick read, it's very small. But I don't quite know what it was. I loved it and I don't know why, and I think that's sort of what the poems feel like too, that you kind of get it and you kind of feel something but you don't really know what it is you feel or why you're feeling it. If that sounds of any interest to you, then please go and pick this up and tell me what the hell is going on. So these are my non-fiction / other reads that I had in the month of June. Hopefully you've enjoyed learning a little bit about what I've read this month and that you've had a really lovely reading month too, and I'm looking forward to your reading in July. I'll see you soon. Bye bye.